Today we are going to talk about the measurement of attitudes, and we are going to talk about the methods of attitude scale construction, that is the scales which are used to measure attitude. And what are those scales? One is Hurstone's equal appearing interval scale. Then we are going to talk about Likert's method of summated ratings, Osgood and Tannenbum's semantic differential scale. We will also talk about briefly Bogardus' method of social distance. So, we will start about this concept of measurement of attitudes. The study and measurement of attitudes forms an important part and aspect of social psychology. Attitudes are beliefs based on evaluations that create a predisposition in the individual to respond in a preferential way. That is, attitudes are predispositions which enable an individual to react positively or negatively to some social object or situation. Most definitions of attitudes suggest that there are three major components: cognitive, affective and behavioral components. The cognitive component usually involves the thinking aspect behind the attitude, and the affective component looks at the feelings about the attitude object, and the behavioral component reflects the actual behavior of the individual, though this is rather an unreliable indication of an attitude. So, in order to preserve a positive self-image, people's responses may be affected by social desirability. I am sure as social psychology students, you all know what is social desirability. Given this problem, various methods of measuring attitudes have been developed. However, all of them have their own limitations. In particular, the different measures focus on different components of attitudes. We just talked about those three components: cognitive, affective and behavioral. These components do not necessarily coincide. One may not go with the other. So, there are several ways of measuring attitudes, but most popular are self-report versions. That is, I tell about my attitude, not somebody else. Attitude scales enable measurement of attitudes in quantitative terms. That is, by numerically summarizing the responses of several respondents to sets of statements provided by the researchers to explore the dimensions of their opinions toward one common theme. An attitude scale thus is designed to provide a valid or accurate measure of an individual's social attitude. Attitude scales involve the application of standardized questionnaires to enable individuals to be placed on a dimension indicating degrees of favorability towards the object in question. The assignment to a position on this dimension is based on individuals' agreement or disagreement with a number of statements relevant to the attitude object. Psychologists have generated many hundreds of scales indexing attitudes to a wide range of objects. The individual items or statements in an attitude scale are usually not of interest in themselves. The interest is usually located in the total score or subscores of certain dimensions. In effect, any set of items works as well as any other set of items, provided they elicit the same final score. That is, they are equally reliable and valid. An attitude scale usually consists of statements, that is, the belief component of the theoretical attitude. These statements could all be preceded by something like I believe that. Some or all, depending on the particular method adopted, are rated on 3, 5, 7 or even more point scale: 3-point scale, 5-point scale, 7-point scale, 9-point scale and so on. This rating provides an index of the emotive value or affective component of each statement. The third element of the attitude, that is the behavioral component, is not assessed. This behavioral component may not be congruent with the expressed attitude as measured on the questionnaire, since other factors also matter a lot. This takes us to the methods of attitude scale construction first. A series of statements are prepared which serve as the marks of measurement scale of attitudes. Each statement will represent a specified degree of acceptance or rejection of that belief. Further, these statements are equally spaced throughout the entire attitude continuum from complete acceptance to the complete rejection of a belief. You see this whole continuum. In some scales, the items form a gradation of such a nature that individual agrees with only one or two which correspond to his position on that dimension being measured, and he or she disagrees with other statements on either side of those he has selected. Such scales in which a person's response localizes his position are sometimes called as differential scales. In other scales, individual indicates his agreement or disagreement with each item, and his total score is found by adding the subscores assigned to his responses to all the separate items in that scale. Such scales are sometimes called summated scales in such a way that the items form a cumulative series. Theoretically, an individual whose attitude is at a certain point on the dimension being measured will answer favorably all the items on one side of that point and answer unfavorably all those items on the other side of that point. So, cumulative, put together what is his score. We will start with the most important, very popular Hurstone's scale. This scale was the first formal technique to measure an attitude. It was developed by Hurstone in 1928 as a means of measuring attitudes towards religion. In his theory underlying this method of equal appearing intervals, the theory says that if a person indicates the statements which he accepts and rejects, he can be placed at a definite position on a continuum which becomes a scale indicative of his attitude. For this, a series of appropriate statements need to be selected to determine his position on the attitude continuum, on which each statement can be represented. However, care has to be taken such that these statements represent all the points on the continuum from complete acceptance to complete rejection. It is important that the investigator must not let his opinions or her opinions or prejudices affect the collection and editing of the statements which are collected. So, what are the steps in the construction of such a scale? About 200 to 300 statements need to be collected to prepare this kind of a attitude scale. These statements are then edited. Statements not very pertinent to the issue under consideration or are ambiguous, vague, are eliminated. Similarly, duplicating statements, that is repetitive statements, which are also eliminated, and the statements are reworded so that they are more effective. So, thus editing will be done. Then care is taken to see that the statements are reflections of opinions and not well known facts. Care also is taken that the language used for statements is simple, crisp, complete, definite and straight, so that they could be either accepted or rejected. These statements are then arranged from one end of the continuum to the other end of the continuum, that is from extremely favorable to extremely unfavorable. Now, they are arranged in equal appearing intervals, so that a scale resembling a foot rule, your ruler, could be constructed in order to do this. Hurstone collected a list of statements from several sources like newspaper articles, legislature proceedings on issues, pamphlets, opinions of colleagues, and in several ways he has collected all these opinions, and he then got each statement typed on a slip of paper. He asked several people to be the judges and to sort out these slips in 9 to 11 groups. For example, if we take up statements expressing our attitude towards prohibition of liquor, for example, hundreds of statements involving definite opinions from complete acceptance to complete rejection may be collected. The judges then are asked to sort the statements such that all those which express the favorable opinion about prohibition are sorted out into one pile. Other end, all those statements which express the unfavorable opinion about prohibition are piled up as the 9th or 11th pile. So, 1 to 11. The other statements are classified in between these two depending upon the degree of approval or disapproval of prohibition without letting their subjective opinions affect the sorting. The next step then is, after classifying the statements into various piles by judges, the next step will be to find out the median value of each statement. So, thus a scale is constructed, and the advantages of this scale of Hurstone are that this scale may be combined with Likert scale. This scale gives scope for analysis of inter-item agreement among the judges, and owing to the 1 to 11 continuum, it becomes very easy to understand a neutral position. The disadvantages, however, will be there. And what are those disadvantages? Its development is time consuming and is cumbersome and is definitely not cost effective. This is also less reliable compared to the Likert scale that we are going to talk about. This brings us to the next method, that is Likert's method of summated ratings. This scale is named after its inventor, psychologist Likert. It is the most widely used approach to scaling market survey research, such that the term the Likert type scale is often used interchangeably with a rating scale. Although there are other types of rating scales, still Likert type scale is used. That term is used. Now, what is this Likert scale? It assumes that the strength or intensity of an attitude is linear, that is, on a continuum from strongly agree to strongly disagree, and that attitudes can be measured. It is a bipolar scaling method, two poles, extreme opposites, either positive or negative response to a statement. Likert scales have the advantage of allowing for degrees of opinion and even no opinion for that matter, rather than a simple yes or no from the respondent. This method in fact is much simpler than that of Hurstone. A Likert scale has statements that the respondent is asked to evaluate by giving it a numerical value on a particular dimension with a level of agreement or disagreement. Statement about something is made and is then followed by a series of numbers which the people can choose to show how much they agree with something. The subject is asked, that is the participant is asked to indicate the degree or strength of his attitude towards each statement on a 5-point scale. For example, strongly agree, agree, undecided, disagree, strongly disagree, from this extreme to that extreme, from this pole to the other pole. These answers are assigned numerical values ranging from 5 to 1 or 1 to 5. Accordingly, as the response is favorable or unfavorable, depending upon that, the score is assigned. Thus, high scores indicate a favorable attitude. For example, let us take an example and discuss. The politicians are impartial in their treatment of citizens. This is the statement made. Strongly agree, strongly disagree. If you strongly agree, 5, if you strongly disagree, 1. If the numbers indicated by the participant for several statements are summed up, similar statements are made, and when the score is summed up, a score which represents the person's attitude towards that particular dimension which is being measured is arrived at. Hence, the term summated ratings, a sum of the ratings. The response categories in Likert scales have a rank order, but the intervals between these values cannot be presumed equal. In addition to looking at how much the respondents agree with a particular statement, Likert items may also focus on things such as likelihood, frequency or importance. In such cases, respondents will be asked to identify how likely they believe something to be true. In such cases, we give the answers such as always true, usually true, sometimes true, usually not true, never true. How frequently they engage in a behavior or experience a particular thought. For this, the response categories will be very frequently, frequently, occasionally, rarely or never. In all these you see that two polar ends are there. Or on the other hand, how important they feel that that particular dimension or that something is to them. Then the response categories will be very important, important, somewhat important, not very important, not important. The individual score on a particular attitude scale is the sum of all these ratings that the respondent gives on each of these items in the scale. The scores of this scale have to be interpreted merely on a relative basis, that is, on the basis of whether the score is higher or lower, indicating whether the attitude of the individual is more favorable or more unfavorable. So, as I said, the two polar ends. In this method also elaborate steps are followed in order to eliminate all the weak items by finding out the correlation of each item with the total test. This is how the internal consistency is established. An advantage of Likert's technique is that it indicates the intensity of opinion as well as the direction of opinion. The process of construction of the scale is very simple, and the scale is likely to produce very reliable results and accurate results as well. It is the most widely used scale. However, like all surveys, the validity of Likert scale of attitude measurement can be compromised due to social desirability according to researchers. There is also a possibility of central tendency bias, where the respondents have a tendency to locate or indicate their responses towards undecided option, so that they avoid a particular opinion. This brings us to the next scale, that is semantic differential scale. This rating scale is designed to measure the connotative meaning of objects, events and concepts. The theoretical and instrumental basis of this technique has been built by Osgood, and Tannenbum and presented in their seminal book The Measurement of Meaning by Osgood, and Tannenbum in way back in 1957. The semantic differential technique asks a person to rate an issue or topic on a standard set of bipolar adjectives here. Adjectives, connotative meaning, isn't it? So, they are presented in pairs at either end of a series of scales, such as the following. Please look at the diagram there, the picture over there. Two polar opposites are given with semantically different opposite meanings. So, the semantic differential technique reveals information on three basic dimensions of attitudes. The first is evaluation, the second is potency, that is the strength, and the third is activity. What is evaluation? Evaluation is concerned with whether a person thinks positively or negatively about the attitude topic at hand. For example, like in the scale which I have demonstrated to you, dirty or clean, ugly or beautiful. Then comes the potency. Potency is concerned with how powerful the topic is for the person. Example, is that cruel or is it kind, strong, weak, the intensity, that is what matters here. Then the third is the activity, which is concerned with whether the topic is seen as active or passive. For example, we can directly use active, passive. The advantages of semantic differential scale are that it includes bipolar adjectives and it is very simple to understand and very economical means of measuring attitudes. And it is also the most appropriate scale when the researcher is interested in the measuring of feelings in forms of evaluation, potency as well as the activity of the respondent. However, there will be disadvantages with each scale. So, the disadvantage of semantic differential scale is the evaluation dimension, whether the feelings towards a particular attitude are good or bad. It also has a susceptibility to social desirability bias like the previous scales that we have been talking about, and respondent may be more favorable towards the evaluation in terms of positive. Especially since they are adjectives, they may move towards positive adjective. So, this brings us to yet another scale, the method of social distance. We are going to talk about the Bogardus social distance scale. This has been developed by Bogardus and is useful to empirically measure people's willingness to participate in social contacts of varying degrees of closeness with members of diverse social groups such as racial groups, ethnic groups. We are aware of various degrees of social intimacy in our lives. A stranger is talked to and given importance differently as compared to a close friend or relative of ours. While the stranger is talked to near the door, you go to the door and from there you may talk, or you may stay outdoors and talk to them. But if it is a friend or a relative, they are invited into the close quarters of our home and we may eat together as well. There are also varying degrees of intimacy or social distance when we are dealing with people of different social stratifications as per our beliefs and culture. For example, people belonging to lower socioeconomic strata may not be treated the same way as people belonging to higher socioeconomic strata at a personal level or on a formal occasion and situation. An element of social distance becomes visible in varying degrees in our personal relationships as well as in our social relationships with members belonging to other groups which we don't belong to. Social distance is vividly understood in the context of certain racial and ethnic groups. The social distance scale developed by Bogardus measures the dimensions of prejudice, including the degrees of warmth, intimacy, indifference or hostility between an individual and any social, racial or ethnic groups. Thus, the method is useful to study prejudice among a particular group of individuals. Higher the prejudice, lesser is the social interaction. Using the method of social distance, we can identify whether individuals are closer to a particular group or avoid the group. The items in the social distance scale relate with the individual as well as the social groups. The scale asks people the extent to which they would be accepting of each group, which means a score of 1 is given for a group is taken to indicate no social distance. When 1 is given, no social distance. So, let's look at an example. As close relatives by marriage, that is as the legal spouse of a close relative, score will be 1. As my close personal friends, score will be 2. As neighbors on the same street, score is 3. As co-workers in the same occupation, score is 4. As citizens in my country, score is 5. As non-citizen visitors in my country, score is 6. Would exclude from entry into my country, 7. So, larger the distance, greater the score over here. It is a cumulative scale because agreement with any item implies agreement with all the preceding items. The scale has been criticized as oversimplified because social interactions and attitudes in close familial or friendship type relationships may be different from some people from social interactions with and attitudes toward relationships with far away contacts such as those citizens or visitors in one's country. How much of social interaction would you have with it? As we conclude this lesson on the measurement of attitudes, let us also talk about certain problems related to measurements of attitudes. There are certain shortcomings in these self-report scales of attitudes. There are various problems that affect the validity of attitude scales. There are problems with attitude measurement and which are of 3 types. The first one is operationalization of variables. Often it is seen that the researchers clearly do not define their attitude variables. That is, they do not actually operationalize the constructs that they intend to measure. That is one problem. Second problem is the process of measurement proper and the associated ambiguity. Reports about the methods used to develop measures of attitudes are reported in only a minority of the research studies found in the literature. Finally, the lack of depth. Attitude measurement has tended to be of only peripheral importance according to some researchers. So, this concludes the lesson on attitude change and in particular the measurement of attitudes. Today in our lesson we have talked about what is measurement of attitudes, why they are measured and how they are measured, how a scale is constructed. We talked about several methods such as Thurstone's method, Likert's method, Osgood and Tannenbum's method, the summated rating scales, and also about the semantic differential method and social distance method as well. This concludes our lesson on attitude change. Thank you.